Welcome to the Terry Podcast, everybody. We're back with Season 1, Episode 4.
Episode 4 already, huh?
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right?
That's right. That's right.
And today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something that I think is going to be super useful for a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, especially if you're, in the medical field at all.
Yeah.
This is going to be something that
It could save lives, potentially.
absolutely. This is about as fundamental as it gets.
So this is crash cart improvement using FOCUS-PDCA.
All right, FOCUS-PDCA.
FOCUS-PDCA. And this episode is brought to you by the Terry Quality Team.
Right. So, again,
Yeah.
As you may or may not know, Terry is a medical health tech company.
Right.
So the efficiency and reliability of, equipment like crash carts is just absolutely fundamental to, the healthcare settings that we serve.
Right.
So this
Right.
is this is bread and butter stuff.
Yeah, this is a big one. And the Terra Quality team, they put together a really interesting analysis of this whole situation based on a case study that they titled Crash Cart Focus PDCA.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to break down today.
Okay, sounds good.
So think of this as kind of like you're getting this inside track on how healthcare providers can, really level up their game
Yeah.
when it comes to emergency response.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at a real world scenario and the actual steps that were taken to make things better.
Excellent. I will say, if as we're going through this, if any of this is intriguing to you and you want to, kind of explore any of these areas a little bit more in depth, please feel free to visit our website,
Terry.care.
terry.care.
That's where all the good stuff is.
That's right. All the juice.
All right, so let's jump right in. So this case study, they kick it off by highlighting, a pretty significant problem that they found in terms of crash cart management.
Right.
What exactly sparked this whole review?
Well, so they're referencing case study #5B, right? And essentially, they describe this instance where a crash cart was found open. And there wasn't really, any apparent reason for why it should have been open.
Okay.
And then, upon further investigation, they discovered that the lock on this same cart was actually broken
Oh, wow.
and had what's called a Metro red tag attached to it. So
Red tag, not good.
yeah, so you've got a broken lock and a red tag.
Yeah.
And this really paints a picture of, a system that maybe isn't quite as tight as it really should be.
Yeah, right.
Right? When you're talking about something as crucial as a crash cart,
Right, absolutely.
you really want to make sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted.
Yeah, for sure. So what kind of questions did this particular, incident raise for the quality team? What were they starting to think about?
Well, it immediately, this is a big red flag.
Right.
So it immediately raises questions about, their existing processes, right?
Yeah.
So they start examining, the methods they have in place for checking the crash carts.
Uh-huh.
How thorough are these checks? What's the procedure, for endorsing a cart, essentially, confirming that it's fully stocked and ready to go for an emergency.
Right.
And crucially, what is the role of supervisors in all of this?
Mm-hmm.
Are they actually, making sure that staff are adhering to, to the proper procedures?
It's interesting you bring that up because you can have all the procedures in place, but if they're not being followed, then
Exactly.
it doesn't really matter.
It's all for naught.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just, it's just words on paper.
Right, exactly.
Quickly.
So they identified this initial problem. What's the next step in the FOCUS-PDCA approach?
Well, the next step, and this is really smart on their part, I think, is they assemble an improvement team.
Okay.
And the reason why this is so important is because right off the bat, they're taking a multidisciplinary approach. Right. The case study really stresses how important it is to have, different people from, all walks of life within that, that kind of ecosystem.
Within the hospital setting, you mean?
Within the hospital setting,
Okay.
all coming together to, kind of tackle an issue like this.
Right.
And specifically, they suggested a team that includes a staff nurse,
Okay.
the nurse manager, a nurse supervisor, someone from the co-team, and a clinical nurse educator.
So a variety of perspectives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the reason why this is so crucial is because, each person is going to bring a unique and valuable perspective to the table.
Right. So can you maybe elaborate on why each of those roles is important?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, think about it from the ground level. The staff nurse is the one who's actually, using the crash cart in real-time situations.
Right.
Right. They're the ones who are going to have, those moments where it's like, oh, if only this had been, a little bit different,
Yeah.
or, or this worked really well, and so they can offer really valuable insights into, what's working, what's not working, and what some of the challenges are. Then you have the nurse manager, right?
Right.
And the nurse manager has, kind of a broader view of the unit's operations.
Mm.
So they can see how, crash cart management fits into the overall, workflow of the unit.
Right.
Then you've got the nurse supervisor.
Right.
And they're really key for, making sure that everyone's adhering to policies and procedures
Across the board.
across the board.
Yeah.
Making sure that everything's consistent from shift to shift.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, you have the code team member. Now, this person is an expert in emergency response.
Of course.
They know exactly what equipment and supplies are needed.
When it hits the fan.
When it hits the fan, that's right.
Right.
And then finally, you have the clinical nurse educator.
Right.
And they're essential because they're the ones who are responsible for making sure that all the staff have, the training,
Right.
the competency,
Yeah.
regarding crash cart procedures.
So everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by bringing all of these people together,
Yeah.
you get a much more holistic, understanding of what the problem is.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And what the potential solutions are.
Right. And it really kind of highlights the fact that this isn't something that can just be done in isolation.
Oh, absolutely not.
You need that input.
It has to be a team effort.
You need that team.
Yeah.
So they've identified the problem. They've got their A-team assembled. What do they do next?
So the next really critical step, and I think this often gets overlooked, is to really clarify the current process.
Okay.
Because,
Yeah.
Before you can even think about making any improvements,
Just have to understand what's actually happening.
you have to understand exactly how things are being done now. So they needed to really get a clear picture of how crash cart checks were actually being performed,
Mm-hmm.
in practice.
Yeah.
Not just what the procedure said.
Right. The theoretical versus the
Right.
reality.
Exactly right.
Right.
So this involved looking at a few key areas.
Okay. What were those?
So first and foremost, they wanted to understand, how are staff actually using the checklist
Okay.
during their crash cart checks?
Yeah.
Are they just, kind of ticking boxes?
Right. Just going through the motions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or are they really, being mindful? Are they being thorough? Are they actually checking the contents of the cart?
Right.
So that's number one. Number two, they wanted to clarify the established method for endorsing a crash cart.
Okay.
What's the official procedure for, confirming that this cart is ready for use?
Right.
And then finally, they wanted to look at supervisory responsibilities.
Okay.
How are supervisors ensuring that staff are competent
Right.
and, and are following the procedures?
Yeah. Making sure that everything's kind of being done by the book.
Exactly. So they were really trying to bridge that gap between, what the policy said
Right.
and what was actually
The
happening.
theory and the practice.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's a crucial distinction in any kind of quality improvement effort.
Yeah, for sure.
So once they had that clear picture of, what the current state was, then they moved on to the next phase of FOCUS, which
Right.
is analyzing the issues.
Okay.
So now they're really getting into the nitty-gritty.
Okay. So what did they find? Anything surprising?
Well, yeah, they identified a few key areas of concern. And I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people.
Okay.
One of the big things they found was that the checklist itself,
Yeah.
wasn't always being treated with the level of importance
Oh, interesting.
that it deserved.
Okay.
There was this sense that, sometimes staff might have been, filling it out,
Just checking the box.
checking the boxes,
Mhm.
signing off on it,
Right.
without actually conducting a thorough check of the cart.
Right.
And this happens all the time. This is like human nature, right?
Right.
You've got this procedure.
You get complacent.
You get complacent. You're like, oh, yeah. No, I know I've done this 1,000 times.
It's just a piece of paper.
Yeah, it becomes meaningless.
Right.
So recognizing that, that human element is really, really important.
It's interesting you say that because it reminds me of, pilots use checklists
Absolutely.
all the time.
For a reason.
Right.
And it's, because they're not infallible.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's a sign of, wanting to do things properly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a safety net.
Right. Okay.
It's there to help you.
Yeah.
So what else did they find? Well, another thing they observed was that the process of crash cart endorsement, sometimes took place away from the actual physical cart,
Oh, interesting.
which, kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah. You're not actually looking at it.
You're not actually looking at it to confirm that everything is there. And then finally, they noticed, a lack of consistent monitoring by supervisors
Oh, okay.
to make sure that, staff were actually following the procedures.
Right, so a couple of vulnerabilities in the system there.
Yeah, a couple of cracks in the foundation, so to speak.
Yeah, so with, with this kind of deeper understanding now of the issues, how did they then go about making concrete improvements?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So based on this analysis, they were able to define, very specific improvement goals. They knew exactly what needed to change to address those root causes that they had identified.
So what were those specific improvements?
All right, so number one, reemphasize to all staff, the critical importance of that checklist.
Okay.
That checklist is not just a piece of paper.
Right. It's there for a reason.
It's there to help them. It's there to help the patient.
Right.
So that was number one. Number two, demonstrate and reinforce the proper procedure for crash cart endorsement and make sure that it's done at the cart.
So you can see it.
So you can actually see it and verify that everything's there.
Right.
And then finally implement stricter and more consistent monitoring
By the supervisors.
by the supervisors. That's right.
Yeah.
To ensure that, people are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
So it sounds like they really had a good plan, based on the information that they gathered. So the next step in this FOCUS-PDCA cycle is planning the actual improvement project.
That's right.
What did that entail?
So the planning phase, it involves kind of fleshing out the objectives of the project in more detail, right?
Okay.
So their main goal was to really improve the overall system.
Okay.
For checking and endorsing the crash carts.
Okay.
But importantly, they also wanted to develop a way to track the impact of these changes.
Right. Measure the results.
So measure the results, exactly.
Yeah.
Are we actually making a difference?
Yeah. Are we actually improving things?
Right. So that measurement piece is absolutely crucial.
Totally. You got to know if it's working right.
Exactly.
So they've got the plan. What happens next?
Well, the rubber meets the road
Okay.
in the next phase, which is the do phase.
Do phase.
Of the FOCUS-PDCA cycle.
Okay. So what did they actually do?
All right. So a few key actions were taken.
Yeah.
Number one, they focused on the checklist itself.
Okay.
Right. They wanted to develop a standardized checklist.
Okay.
That was clear, concise, easy to use.
Something that was actually helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they also, really committed to educating all the staff
Right.
on, how to use it properly.
Not just, here's the checklist, see?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
They really wanted to make sure that people understood
Right.
why it was important and how to use it.
Yeah.
Then number two, they provided, clear step-by-step guidelines and training
On the whole process.
on how to check the crash carts,
Okay.
making sure that everyone was on the same page.
Yeah.
In terms of what the expectations were. And then finally, and this is a really smart move, I think they established these regular weekly meetings
Okay.
involving staff and unit managers
To kind of go over everything.
to go over everything, discuss the procedures, address any questions or challenges that people were having.
Yeah. I mean, that constant communication is so important, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Because things change all the time.
Yeah. And it keeps it top of mind, right?
Right. Exactly.
It's not just like, oh, yeah, we did that training 6 months ago.
Right.
No. This is something we're talking about every single week.
Yeah. So that everybody's, up to date on the latest and greatest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, those weekly meetings were a really proactive step.
Yeah. I think so, too.
It's not just about implementing changes and then walking away. It's about creating that continuous feedback loop.
Yeah.
Right. Making sure that everyone's on board and, and kind of reinforcing those best practices.
Yeah. So they put all these changes into place. What's the next crucial step?
Well, the next step is you got to check your work.
Okay.
Right. So this is the check phase.
The check phase.
Of the FOCUS-PDCA cycle.
Okay.
And this is where the team evaluates the results.
Of all the changes they made.
Of the changes.
Okay.
So are we actually making a difference? Are these changes actually improving things?
So how do you measure that?
Well, they used a few different methods, which is really smart.
Okay.
One of the key things they did was they looked at, what are called occurrence variance reports.
Okay.
Or OVRs.
Oh, yeah.
And these are essentially incident reports.
Okay.
So by looking at, trends in crash cart related OVRs, they could get a sense of, are we actually reducing the number of incidents? Are things getting better?
Right.
They also, made it a point to get feedback from staff.
During those meetings.
Right. What's working, what's not working? What are you seeing on the ground?
Right. What are the pain points?
Exactly. And then finally, they also do these random unannounced checks
Okay.
of the crash carts themselves,
Okay.
just to kind of, get a snapshot.
Make sure people are still doing it.
Exactly.
If no one's watching.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was a really comprehensive approach to evaluation.
Makes sense. You want to look at it from different angles to
Exactly.
make sure that you're getting the full picture.
Right.
So let's say you do all this and the check phase, everything looks good. What happens in the act phase?
Well, if everything's looking good, then,
Yeah.
you want to make those changes permanent.
Okay.
Right. So, if the data's showing that, hey, these changes are effective,
Right.
then the plan was to formally adopt them,
Make them official.
make them official,
Yeah.
make them this standard procedure.
So it's not just a temporary thing.
Yeah.
It's the new way of doing things.
This is the way we do things now.
Yeah.
Right. And, it's important because you don't want to put in all that effort just to have things kind of drift back
Right. To the old ways.
to the old ways.
Yeah.
But you know what? If the check phase shows that, hey, these changes aren't as effective as we thought they would be,
And then what? Back to the drawing board.
back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Right. So, you analyze the data, you figure out why it's not working,
Okay.
and you try something else.
Yeah. You tweak it, you iterate.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of this, PDCA cycle.
Right.
It's a process of continuous improvement.
So you're always getting better.
You're always striving to get better.
Right.
Even if things are working well, you can always find ways to make them even better.
That's right. And even if the changes are effective, there's still that step of, communicating that success.
Yes.
Making sure that everyone knows,
Absolutely.
hey, we did a good job. This is working.
Yeah, celebrate those wins.
Right. Exactly.
And, that helps to reinforce the value of the changes. And it encourages, continued buy-in.
Right. And it kind of, I guess, prevents that, complacency from setting in again.
Exactly.
Because now it's like, okay, we know this works. Let's keep doing it.
Right, right.
So as you can see, this, deep dive into the Crash Cart FOCUS-PDCA case study from the Turia Quality team.
Yeah.
It's really a, valuable framework for tackling these issues that are so critical in healthcare.
It gives you that step-by-step roadmap
Right.
for how to identify a problem.
Yeah.
How to put together a team.
Right.
How to really understand what's going on.
Yeah.
How to analyze the root causes. How to pick the right improvements.
Right. How to track them.
How to implement them. How to track them. How to act on the data.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards.
The whole 9 yards.
Right. And the specific details from the case study, starting with that broken lock and the red tag, all the way to, the emphasis on the checklist and the importance of that endorsement procedure.
Yeah.
It really shows you how this methodology can actually be used in the real world.
Yeah, it's not just theoretical.
Right.
So this is boots on the ground stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and ultimately, this is all about patient safety.
Right.
This is about making sure that when someone needs help,
right,
that help is there.
That crash cart is ready to go.
That crash cart is ready to go.
Yeah, and that is, at the heart of what Terry's all about.
Absolutely. As a medical health tech company,
Yeah.
that's our bread and butter.
Right.
Making sure that people have the tools they need
To save lives.
Yeah. When they need them.
Exactly.
So.
We hope this overview has been helpful for you today.
Yeah.
Giving you a little bit of a better understanding of how FOCUS-PDCA can be used to make things better in healthcare.
And, if you want to learn more about this.
Or anything else Terry is working on.
Or any of the other cool stuff that Terry's doing.
Head over to the website, terry.care.
Terry.care.
That's where it's all at.
That's where the magic happens.
Oh.
So, as we wrap up here, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
We talked a lot about crash carts today.
We did.
But this methodology, this FOCUS-PDCA,
right,
it's not just limited to healthcare.
Right. It can be applied to so many different things.
So many different things.
Yeah.
So I want you to think about, what are some other areas in your life
Yeah.
where, having consistent processes,
Right.
having, equipment that's ready to go when you need it,
Right.
is absolutely critical.
Food for thought.
Food for thought.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for this episode of the Target Podcast. Until next time.
Take care.
Bye.